Now, I hope you remember that this morning I was trying, in the brief space of 50 minutes, to give you a basic introduction to Mahayana Buddhism, the kind of Buddhism that is found in China and Japan, and the kind of Buddhism of which Zen Buddhism in particular is a subsect. And we are rather particularly concerned with Zen, since it has had such a fundamental influence in the shaping of Japanese culture and the arts of Japan, and since we are in the course of this informal tour going to be visiting a good deal of Zen monasteries and seeing a great deal of Zen formed works of art, architecture, and so on. So I want to lead now tonight from Buddhism in general, or Mahayana Buddhism in general, to Zen in particular. Now, Zen plays a little game with you. Whenever anybody like myself or Dr. Suzuki talks about Zen, all the other people say, because they talk about it, they don't understand it. Those, in the words of Lao Tzu, who know do not say. Those who say do not know. And yet he said that. He wrote a book of several 80 chapters or so to explain the Tao and the De, its power, and nobody can help themselves. They've got to talk. Human beings are a bunch of chatterboxes. And when we've got something in our minds that we want to talk about, we talk. Now, poetry, though, is the great language, because poetry is the art of saying what can't be said. Every poet knows this. You're trying to describe the indescribable, and every poet also knows that nothing is describable. Whether you take some sort of ineffable mystical experience at one extreme, or whether you take an ordinary rusty nail at the other, nothing is really describable. In the words of the famous Count Korzybski, whatever you say something is, it isn't. We used to have a professor at Northwestern who would produce a match booklet in front of his class and would say to them, "What is it?" And they would say, "Match booklet." He'd say, No, match booklet is a noise. Is this a noise? What is it? And so to answer this, he'd throw it at them. That's what it is. So in this way, you see, nothing can really be described. And yet, on the other hand, we all know perfectly well what we mean when we talk. If you shared an experience with somebody else, then of course you can talk about it. We can all talk about fire and air and water and wood because we know what it is. And there's no mystery. So in the same way, when it comes to discussing something so esoteric as Zen, it can be discussed. Only, Zen people play games with each other. They play little tricks. They test each other out by saying to somebody, I remember when I met Paul Reps for the first time, who wrote that lovely book, Zen Flesh and Zen Bones. And he said to me, "Well," he said, "you've written quite a number of books by now. You must think you're pretty fancy." I said, "I haven't said a word." This is simply a Zen game. And people sort of feel each other out. There's a poem which says, "When two Zen masters meet each other on the road, they need no introduction. Thieves recognize one another instantaneously." So now, having got that off my chest, it's to say then, if I were to give you a really proper and really and truly educative talk about Zen, I would gather you around here and sit here in silence for 5 minutes and leave. And in a way, this would be a much more direct, exposition of it than what I'm going to do instead, which is talk about it. Only I have a feeling that you would feel that you were disappointed and somewhat cheated by this kind of behavior if I just left in 5 minutes silence. So then, this word Zen is Japanese way of pronouncing the Chinese word Chan, which in turn is the Chinese way of pronouncing the Sanskrit word jhana. And jhana is a very difficult word to translate into English, if not impossible. It's been called meditation. Meditation in English generally means sitting quietly and thinking about something. And that's not what Zen is. Contemplation might come a little nearer if you use the word in a very technical sense, the sense that it was used, or still is used, among Catholic mystics. Perhaps that's something a bit like Zen. But again, contemplation, as we normally use the word, has a sense of inactivity, a sense of not doing anything, of being completely still and passive, whereas Zen is something highly active. So we really don't have an English word for jhana, Chan, Zen. But I would say that we do know what it is, because we do all sorts of things every day of our lives in the spirit. When, for example, you drive a car, most Americans, at any rate, drive cars since they were teenagers and are very expert drivers. And when they drive a car, they don't think about it. They're one with the car. Or when a rider of a horse is one being with the horse, when you watch a good cowboy or a cavalry rider, he's glued to the horse. He's like a centaur almost. As the horse moves, he moves. Which is in control? Is the horse riding the man or the man riding the horse? You practically don't know. Same way when you have an excellent dancing partner. Who leads? Who follows? It seems as if you are one body and you move together. That is Zen, that is jhana. And so in a wider sense, when a person doesn't react to life, on the one hand, or try to dominate it on the other, but when the internal world of one's own organism and the external world of other people and other things move together as if they were and indeed are one and the same motion, that is Zen. So you could say in a very, very simple way that the real concern of Zen is to realize, not merely to think, but to know in your bones that the inside world inside your skin and the outside world outside your skin, going out as far as anything can go into galaxies beyond galaxies, is all one world and all one being, one self, and you're it. And once you know that, then you have completely abolished all the problems that arise as a result of feeling that you are a stranger in the world, that you are set down in the middle of a hostile and alien domain of nature or people who are not you. This whole sense of estrangement, foreignness to the world is overcome in Zen. Now, let me illustrate this a little before we go into Zen in any kind of technical way by a few rather superficial but nevertheless significant facts out of Japanese culture and the place of Zen in Japanese culture. Japanese culture is, as you may have noticed, or was, as you may have noticed, extraordinarily ritualistic. There is a right way of doing everything, a good form, a proper style. And nowhere is this more apparent than in such practices as the tea ceremony, or arranging flowers, or knowing how to dress, or knowing how to organize a formal dinner. The punctiliousness, the skill of these people in doing these things is quite remarkable. But in the same measure as they are very skillful at doing these things, they're very worried about it. The whole question, for example, of bringing presents to somebody else. Have they given us more than we've given them? Did we remember this occasion? Did we remember that occasion? These weigh very heavily on the Japanese soul. The debt which you owe to your parents, the debt which you owe to your country and to your emperor, immeasurable, infinite debt, never can be paid. All these weigh very heavily. And therefore, in Japan, until the sort of breakaway of modern youth with its westernized ideals, this is a very nervous culture, concerned about whether one is playing the ritual correctly. A culture like that needs an outlet, needs a safety valve, needs a way out of this thing. And Zen provides just that. And so, by contrast, when you meet a Japanese who is thoroughly trained in Zen, he is a different kind of personality altogether from ordinary Japanese. He is, in manners, not studiedly courteous, nor is he brusque, but he's simply at ease. He gives you his whole attention, so long as you give him your whole attention. If you start wandering and frittering, he's got work to do and he promptly leaves. But so long as you are wanting to talk to him, he is there for you and for nobody else. And he sits down, and he really sits. You know, he doesn't worry about whether he ought to be somewhere else. And so unable to sit with complete serenity in one place. You know, if you have half an idea that you ought to be worrying about something out in the garden, or that you ought to be cooking dinner, or that you ought to be down in your office or something, you can't sit where you are. You're not really there. You're a kind of gas balloon that keeps wanting to wander up. But these people, when you'll see, as you meet people connected with Zen, even sometimes the most neophyte, novice of a priest, has this atmosphere of knowing how to live in the present and not to be fidgety and giggly and worrying about whether he's done the right thing. That's very much Zen style. Even though at the same time, the Zen people do have a very exacting and demanding discipline. The function of this discipline is rather curious. It's to enable you to be comfortable. It's to enable you, for example, to sleep on a concrete sidewalk on a cold, wet night and enjoy it. To relax completely under any situation of hardship. You see, ordinarily when you sit you're out in the cold, you start shivering. Why? Because you're resisting the cold. You're tightening your muscles against the cold, and you get the staggers. But you were taught, if you learn Zen discipline, not to do that. Take it easy. Go with the cold. Relax. And all those monks in those monasteries here, they're as cold as hell in winter. And they simply sit there most of the time, and we would be frozen to death and miserable and have influenza and the great Siberian itch. But they simply relax. and learn how to take the cold. So there's nothing about Zen discipline which is masochistic. It isn't to beat your body because your body's bad and is a creation of the devil or something. It has nothing to do with that. It is how to be comfortable under all circumstances. But that again is something rather incidental to the main question of Zen. As I said, the Zen people, as you meet them and as you get to know their style of personality, are at ease in a culture that is not at ease. In a culture that is chronically concerned with protocol. And is it just right? That is indeed a terribly self-conscious culture, where everybody is always watching themselves and having therefore second thoughts about everything. And so the discipline of Zen is to enable you to act without watching yourself. We would say unself-consciously. But Japanese are as terrified of this as we are. They think, and we think, if I don't watch myself, I'll make a mistake. If I don't hold a club over myself, I'll cease to be civilized and become a barbarian. If I don't discipline myself with all sorts of down on those passions of yours, you will become like the monk of Siberia who burst from his cell and devoured the Father Superior. So this basic mistrust and so on in one's own spontaneity makes us wonder that if the Zen people are really spontaneous and they don't plan and premeditate and hold clubs over themselves, won't they become very, very dangerous people socially? Won't they go out and rape their mothers and daughters and murder their grandmothers to inherit their fortunes and so on and so forth? And Zen people just don't do that. And yet they are perfectly spontaneous. So then, let me try then and indicate how this discipline called Zen actually works. This will involve a little bit of letting the cat out of the bag, but can't be helped. Let's go back to what I told you was fundamental to Buddhism. Buddhism is unlike other religions in that it does not tell you anything. It doesn't require you to believe in anything. Buddhism is a dialogue. And what are called the teachings of Buddhism are nothing more than the opening phrases or opening exchanges in the dialogue. Buddhism is a dialogue between a Buddha and an ordinary man, or rather someone who insists on defining himself as an ordinary man, and thereby creates a problem. I quoted you this morning our saying that anybody who goes to a psychiatrist ought to have his head examined. And in exactly the same way, in this culture, anybody who goes to a guru, a spiritual teacher, or a Zen master, or whatever, ought to have his head examined. Or as the old Chinese master Tokuzan put it, if you ask any question, you get 30 blows with my stick. If you don't ask any question, you get 30 blows just the same. In other words, what the hell are you doing around here? Defining yourself as a student and defining me as a teacher. In other words, you have raised the problem. And in the way of training of Zen, this is very clearly emphasized. If you go to a Zen teacher, and you approach him in the traditional way, the first thing he will do is to say, I haven't anything to teach. Go away. Well, you say, what are these people doing around here? Aren't they your students? You say, well, they're working with me, but unfortunately, we are very poor these days. We don't have enough rice really to go around and make ends meet. And we can't take on anybody else in this community. So you have to insist to be taken in. Every postulant for Zen training assumes immediately that the teacher has given him the brush off in order to test his sincerity. In other words, if you really want this thing, you've got to work for it. That isn't the real point. The point is that you've got to make such a fuss to get in that you cannot withdraw gracefully after having made such a fuss to get in. Because you put yourself on the spot and you define yourself as somebody needing help, or as somebody with a problem who needs a master in order to be helped out of the problem. So then, when you've done this, in the old days, of course, and it's still the formal rule among the Zen monasteries here, that when you're a postulant and you want to come in, you have to sit outside at the gate for a week, or maybe only 5 days, in a position of supplication with your head on bowed down on the steps. And they let you in at night because they must give hospitality to any wandering monk, but you expect not to go to sleep any of those 5 nights, but to sit there in meditation. And they give you food. But you sit and you sit and you sit there and you make a damn fool of yourself, saying, I insist on getting into this thing. I insist on learning. I want to know what the secret of this master here is. And he's told you from the start that he doesn't have a secret and that he doesn't teach anything. But you insist that he does. See, that is the situation of everybody who feels that life is a problem to be solved. Whether you want psychoanalysis, whether you want integration, whether you want salvation, whether you want Buddhahood, whatever it is you define yourself as wanting, you created the problem. What is the real problem that everybody brings to these teachers? What is it all about? It's basically this, isn't it? Teacher, I want to get one up on the universe. I feel a stranger in this world. I feel that it's a problem in that having a body means that I am subject to disease and change and death. Having emotions and passions means that I am tormented by feelings which I can't help having, and yet it's not reasonable to act on those feelings without creating trouble. I feel trapped by this world, and so I want to get the better of it. And is there some wise man around who is a master of life and who can teach me to cope with all this? So that's what everybody's looking for in a teacher. The man who is the savior and who can show you how to cope with it. The Zen teacher says, I don't have any answers. Nobody believes that because he seems to be so competent. When you look at him, you can't believe that he has no answers. And yet that's the consistent teaching of Zen, that it has nothing to say and nothing to teach. The great Chinese master of the Tang dynasty, called Linji in Chinese or Rinzai in Japanese, said Zen is like using a yellow leaf to stop a child crying. A child is crying for gold, and the father takes an autumn leaf that's yellow and says, gold. Or he said it's like using an empty fist to deceive a child. See, you've got a closed fist, and you say to the child, what have I got here? And the child says, let me see. Oh, no, put your fist behind your back. And the child becomes more and more excited to know what the devil's in that fist. And fights and fights and fights, and finally is practically in tears. And then suddenly you finally open the fist and there's nothing inside. So in exactly the same way, a person who is under the impression that there is something that we ought to get. See, all this is dressed up in a big way. To be a Buddha, to know the answer, to finally solve the problem, to get the message, to get the word, or however you put it. In other words, to be in control of your fate and of the world. Would you like it? If you could have it? And so all these powers are projected upon the Zen master. He is a Buddha. He is a master of life. And if he is, the reason why he is that he has discovered the unreality of the whole problem. And so all these powers are projected upon the Zen master. He is a Buddha. He is a master of life. And if he is, the reason why he is that he has discovered the unreality of the whole problem. There is not life on the one hand and you on the other. It's all the same. But you see, you can't tell people that. And just by telling, get them to see it. Just in exactly this way, people who know that the earth is flat can't be reasoned with. People who believe that the Bible is the literal word of God, absolutely impossible to reason with them at all, because they know it is so. So in the same way, we tend to know that we're all separate, poor little me, and that we are in need of salvation or something. And we know this is so. And so somebody says, well, you're not really that. You know that that feeling of separateness is an illusion. Well, that's all very nice in theory, but I don't feel it. So what will you do? What will you do with a person who is convinced that the earth is flat? There's no way of reasoning with him. If it's for some reason important that he discovered that the earth is round, you've got to play a game with him. You've got to play a trick on him. You tell him, great, the earth is flat. Let's go and look over the edge. Wouldn't that be fun? Of course, if we're going to look over the edge of the earth, we must be very, very careful that we don't go round in circles, or we'll never get to the edge. So we've got to go along consistently, along a certain line of latitude westwards. And then we're going to come to the edge of the earth, just so long as we're consistent. In other words, in order to convince a flat earthist that the world is round, you've got to make him act consistently on his own proposition and go consistently westwards to find the edge of the world. Now, at last, by going consistently westwards, he comes back to the place where he started. He's been convinced that the earth is at least cylindrical. And he may believe you. Then take it on faith that if he goes along a line of longitude, the same thing will happen. But you see, what you did was to make him persist in his folly. Now that's the whole method of Zen. To make people become perfect egotists. And so explode the illusion of the separate ego. So what happens? In effect then, in the discipline of Zen, when you finally convince the master that you are stupid enough to be accepted as a student, because you've persisted and because you've defined yourself as someone having a problem, he has warned you well in advance that he has nothing to teach. But he says, now I will ask you a question. There are many ways of asking this question, but they all boil down to one common theme, and that is, who are you? You say you have a problem. You say you would like to get out of the sufferings of life. You say you would like to get one up on the universe. I want to know who's asking this question. Show me you. And only they put it in such ways as, before your father and mother conceived you, what was your original nature? Questions like that. And they'll say, now, look, I want to be shown. I don't want a lot of ideas about who you are. I don't want to know who you are in terms of a social role. You know, that you have such degrees or you have such professional qualifications and such a name and such a family. All that's the past. I want to see you genuinely now. It's like saying to a person, now, don't be self-conscious, see? I want you right this minute to be completely sincere. Come on now. Well, nothing is better calculated to make a person incapable of sincerity. This is when relatives come and aunts and uncles, and there's a little child, and they want to review this child and see it, and the parents say to the child, darling, come on now and play for us. See, and the poor child is completely nonplussed. Doesn't know what to do. Because you cannot play on demand. Now, what is the Zen teacher doing in saying to a person, you must answer this question by coming before me in fact, a rather formal situation, the kind of context in which a Zen master interviews his students is very formal. And there he sits, a sort of enthroned tiger. He's definitely, in this culture, a sensei, a authority figure. And so he's the last kind of person you can be spontaneous with. Because you feel that he knows you through and through. And that, do you know, have you ever read that story of Von Kleist about a man who has a fight with a bear? The bear is a mind reader and always knows what move he's going to make, so that the man can never conquer the bear unless he makes a move which he doesn't think about first. How will you do that? And they get the same feeling with relationship to a Zen master. You feel that he is absolutely aware of everything phony about you. That he reads you like a book, but that you can't find a way of being not phony. Think about this a little. You see, we can arrange a group session, and this is a little game that's being played by lots of people. It's a kind of psychotherapy. We can arrange a group session in which the gimmick is this, that when anybody says anything or does anything, the group or some section of the group challenges its sincerity. says, "Why are you coming on so strong? Are you trying to dominate us?" And you see, anything that you do can be interpreted in that way. Because the moment a group of people starts making comments on its own behavior, it is setting up a situation within the group which is analogous, say in a TV studio, to turning the camera on the monitor. So when we start thinking about thinking, being aware of being aware, this is what is called in the Japanese the observing self. I watch myself all the time, see? You're in a hopeless mess. But this is the price that human beings pay for having become self-conscious. Anxiety and guilt. Anxiety because, am I sure that I thought this out sufficiently carefully? When I left the house, did I turn off the gas stove? And incidentally, I remember turning it off, but can I trust my memory? I've learned to think about memory now, and I wonder if I can trust it. Maybe I better go back and look. I went back and I looked. But did I really see? I'm thinking about my sight and whether this is quite authentic. Did I look properly? Because you know how the unconscious can alter your senses. And so I better go and look again. See, soon now I've got into a sort of vicious circle where I'll never get away from the house. And all this sort of getting mixed up is the penalty we pay for the advantageous gift of being able to know that we know. There was a young man who said, though, "It seems that I know that I know. What I would like to see is the I that knows me when I know that I know that I know." And so this is the Zen trick. It's to put you into this situation in a very crucial way. To think about, thinking about, thinking about, thinking about. Or just the same thing, to make a very strong effort not to think. That's Zazen. Sit, let your senses operate, and be responsive to whatever there may be around, but don't think about it. But now this is already thinking. I'm thinking about not thinking. How will I stop thinking about not thinking? So there you are. See, you're all caught up. It's like somebody came to you and they put tar in one hand, or molasses, feathers in the other, slapped the two hands together and rubbed them around and said, "Now pick off the feathers." So you see what happens. The teacher is well aware that he's played this trick on you. And he's going to see what will happen if you act, and he's going to help you to act consistently on this foolishness. Now, you see, what he's done is he simply made a special case of what society does to us all anyhow. And this is true of most cultures. The high cultures of the world, whether they're of the East or whether they're of the West, play a game on every new member. They don't know they're playing this game because their forefathers played it on them, and they're still its hopeless victims. The game is called the double bind. And the formula under whose auspices everybody comes into this world is as follows. You are required to do something which will be acceptable only if you do it voluntarily. You must love me. You must go to sleep. You must be natural. You must be free. Listen to that. You must be free. Now what happens, you see? Society, the community into which every child enters, defines the child. We know who we are as other people react to us. So the other people say to us, you're an independent agent. You're responsible. You are a freely acting individual. But this is a commandment. And we obey it because we can't help it. The child has no way of criticizing this or of seeing there's something phony about it. So the child has to be free because he is commanded to be so by the community. Now then, the community sets itself a problem. Having defined the child as an independent agent, and having got the child to believe that he's an independent agent because he isn't. In other words, he wouldn't believe this if he were independent. It then has trouble getting him to behave as the community wants him to behave. So they feel then there's something ornery about all children. They're born in original sin, and they're refractious and so on. Of course they are, because they've been defined in a self-contradictory way. So when the community says to a person, you must be free, or when we are in a family relationship in which the members of the family are saying to each other, you must love me, it's your duty to love me, what a bunch of rot. Supposing one day you get up and you say to your wife, darling, do you really love me? And she replies, well, I'm trying my very best to do so. Is that the answer you wanted? No. You wanted her to say, darling, I can't help loving you. I love you so much I could eat you. You don't want her to try to love you. And yet that is what you put on people in almost any marriage ceremony. That you shall love this person. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This is a double bind. And anybody who lives under the dominance of a double bind lives in a state of chronic frustration, because he is devoting his whole life to solving a meaningless, nonsensical problem. Let's take the double bind that is the deepest of all. You must go on living. Now, living is a spontaneous process. And to say to it, you must happen, is exactly the same thing as saying to any kind of creative artist, you must come through with the goods. Tonight you must give the superb performance, and above all you must be unself-conscious. Well, this is being done to us all the time. And the object of the Zen discipline is that instead of doing this to people unconsciously, as parents do it and as teachers do it to children, and as the children's peers do it to their own peer members, in Zen the double bind is put on you deliberately, knowing how stupid it is. The teacher is well aware of everything he's doing and what tricks he's playing on you, because he has behind it all the compassionate intent of getting you into such a fierce double bind that you will see how stupid it is. So then, what happens is this. He gives you the double bind. Be genuine. I want to see you do something that is the real you. I had a friend who was studying Zen, and he was given some koan like this to work on. And when he was one day going for his interview, he walked through the garden that connected the sodo, or the monk's study quarters, with the master's place, and there was a big bullfrog. Bullfrogs in this country are rather tame. People don't eat them. And so he swept up the bullfrog and dropped it into the sleeve of his kimono. And when he got in front of the teacher to answer the koan, that is to say, to do spontaneously produce his genuine self, he produced the bullfrog. And the teacher looked at it and shook his head and said, too intellectual. Or, as we might say, too contrived, too studied. That's not yet you. Now, do you see the bind in this? It's like being told that everything is all right at this moment so long as you don't think of a green elephant. So try not to think of a green elephant. See? Now, as he works at this, as he tries to produce the genuine you, the teacher really strings him out on this and makes him work and work and work over a period of many months, until he comes to the point of seeing this. There is nothing you can do to be genuine. The more you do, the phonier you are. But at the opposite extreme, there is nothing you can not do. That is to say, you cannot give up trying to be genuine. You can't relax, and be completely passive and say, well, let's forget about it. Let's think about practical matters and forget all these spiritual concerns. The moment you do that, your abandonment of trying is itself an insidious form of trying. For example, there's a very interesting Hindu teacher by the name of Krishnamurti that many of you may know about. And he tells people, that all their religious inquiry, their yoga practices, their reading religious books and so on, is nothing but a form of perpetuating one's egocentricity, but on a very refined and highbrow level. So he gets a kind of disciple who studiously avoids reading any kind of philosophical or edifying book. They are reduced to reading mystery stories. And they become devoted non-disciples. See, what a clever bind that is. It's the same as the Zen technique. You can't, in other words, let go of your... we've seen, my point was at the beginning, we saw that the way of Buddhism is to let go of yourself, to see that you live in a universe in which nothing can be grasped. Therefore, stop grasping. So here's the problem. I come and say to the teacher, teach me not to grasp. He'll say, why do you want to know? And he shows you that the reason why you want to stop grasping is that it's a new form of grasping. You feel that you will beat the game by being unattached. See, it's horrible to grieve when somebody you love dies. So maybe by being unattached to that person, I can avoid the grief. Pretty cold, isn't it? Maybe, you see, by not having an ego. When life comes and bangs on me, if there's nobody there, it'll be all right. So that's why I want non-ego state. That's phony. All this is a new way of safeguarding and protecting the ego. So this is the way in which Buddhism is a dialogue. So you see, if you go back to fundamental primitive Buddhism, people say to the Buddha, I want to escape from suffering. It's a perfectly honest statement. All right? Realize that suffering is caused by desire. Try not to desire. So the student goes away and tries to eliminate desires by controlling his mind and practicing yoga. Comes back to the teacher and says, it's pretty difficult, but I have managed at least to get rid of some desires. The teacher says to him, but you're still desiring to get rid of desire. What about that one? And then the student sees that if he tries to stop desiring to get rid of desire, but then he's got to stop desiring to get rid of not desiring to desire. And suddenly he finds himself once more with molasses in one hand and feathers in the other, absolutely tied up in a vicious circle. So he realizes there is nothing I can do about it, and there's nothing I can not do about it. And this predicament in Zen is called a mosquito trying to bite an iron bull. A position of such psychic extremity that nothing can be done about it. Now the point here is, what does this situation mean? When you find yourself in that kind of a trap, what's the meaning of the trap? Why, that's very simple. If there's nothing you can do, and also nothing you cannot do about a given situation, it means that you are phony. That, in other words, what we call a separate ego isn't there. Of course it can't do anything, because it is not an agent. And by virtue of the fact that it can't do anything, equally, it can't not do anything. It's completely phony. So what has happened is, to expose the fiction of there being a separate ego, either to force its actions upon the world, or to have the actions of the world forced upon it as a puppet. This thing just doesn't exist, except as a figment of the imagination, or except as a game rule. Let's pretend everybody is responsible, is independent, is separate. Sure, that's a great game, but it's a game. And so, the whole object of this Zen dialogue between the teacher and the student is to carry that game of being the separate ego to its logical conclusion, to its reductio ad absurdum. So that, as Blake said, the fool who persists in his folly will become wise.
Now, this seminar this weekend concerns a subject which is so alien from anything that we understand in the West that it may stretch your skulls a little. I don't know. But as Westerners face certain forms of Mahayana Buddhism from the outside, they see what reminds them of total irrationality and superstition. And this in particular applies to a form of Buddhism which has several names. And they're all, well, it's really one form of Buddhism, but it's named differently. And they are all sub-schools of Mahayana. It's variously known as Vajrayana, Tantrayana, or Mantrayana. You remember the word yana means a course, basically, sometimes a vehicle. And Buddhism is fundamentally likened to a vehicle or something like a raft which you use for crossing a river. Or let's say you want to get in at a door and you have to knock and you need a brick to knock on the door with, so you pick up the brick and bang on the door. That's a yana. It's an instrument, an expedient, a means, a technique, a method. And the Buddha's doctrine is called in Sanskrit the dharma, and dharma has a whole multiplicity of meanings, but one of them is method. Although it's usually translated law in English, this is not a good translation. So the yana, the whole idea of a yana is related to the idea of upaya, which I have previously explained to you. U-P-A-Y-A, meaning skillful means, what we would call a pedagogical device or sort of trick, because upaya in politics means cunning. But in religion or philosophy, it means the skill of a teacher and getting something across to a student. And so the whole essence of upaya is really surprise. Because everybody wants a surprise, but you can't surprise yourself, because you know in advance what you're going to do. When you have hiccups, then indeed you surprise yourself because you didn't intend to. And upaya and surprise is deeply connected with the whole inner meaning of Buddhism. Life has to surprise itself. Because if it doesn't, you don't know you're there. Because you only know existence to the degree that there is a balance between knowing and not knowing. See? So there must be the surprise. There must always be something in you, in other words, that is sort of spiritual hiccups that happens unbeknownst. So an upaya is a method of the teacher producing the surprise of enlightenment in the student, and he uses a yana, that is to say a vehicle or a course, just like we say we give a course in philosophy or semantics or chemistry or something. And so the course then is the Mahayana, the great course, which includes ever so many different upayas or different ways. The Hinayana, the little course, which has only a few ways. Now, in the Hinayana, they are very tough-minded, and they stick to the notion that all enlightenment depends on your own effort. The Buddha is supposed to have said just before he died, "Be you lamps unto yourselves, be you a refuge unto yourselves. Take to yourselves no other refuge." And in Japanese classification of Buddhist schools, they have two that are respectively called Jiriki and Tariki, and they classify all schools of Buddhism under these headings. Ji means self, Riki means power. So there are ways of salvation, or better, more accurately, liberation by your own power, Jiriki. And then Tariki are the ways by the power of another. That is to say, liberation through what Christians would call grace, rather than works. And it's fascinating how the problem of faith and works, or grace and works, turns up in Buddhism just as it does in Christianity. And it's really the same problem. You see, in the history of Christianity, there was a huge argument around 400 AD between a Welshman, or a Celt, by the name of Pelagius and Augustine of Hippo. And Pelagius was a kind of optimistic Britisher who believed in muddling through, playing the game, putting your nose to the grindstone, and so on. And he believed that one's own will and effort could obey the commandments of God, because he argued that God would not have given us any commandments unless we could have obeyed them. But St. Augustine said that he missed the point entirely, that if he had read St. Paul properly, especially the Epistle to the Romans, he would have found out that God did not give us commandments in order that we should obey them, but in order to prove that we couldn't. That is to say, as St. Paul put it, to convict us of sin. That the law, in other words, was a gimmick, an upaya. And nobody was ever expected to obey the law. The Ten Commandments, summarizing the law. Especially, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind. Nobody can do that at all. And so even the greatest saints are always beating their breasts and confessing that they're abysmal sinners, because they've realized that they can't live up to the commandments. So therefore, St. Paul taught that the law, he said, is a pedagogue to lead us to Christ. And you see, a pedagogue has the same meaning as upaya. So what the law does is make you feel absolutely awful because you can't obey it or do anything about it. Now the Buddhists have come to an exactly similar conclusion in the course of time, because the Buddha was apparently, in his original teaching, tough-minded, and said, listen boys, you better discipline yourselves, see? And you get to work and you cut out women and drink and possessions and meditate and control your minds. Whew. Well, everybody tried this. And of course they couldn't do it. A few people did. Only they dried up. They found that it was a kind of a Pyrrhic victory. That what you gain by stopping your humanity and stopping your emotions isn't worth getting. It's like cutting off your head to cure the headache. So they realized that wasn't the way. But that was why Buddha suggested it, so that they'd find out. So then came in the new schools of Buddhism, which said that you must be liberated by tariki. And ta, as I said, means other power. That is to say, the power of something in you that is not your ego, just in the same way as your heart doesn't beat at the will of your ego. So in psychoanalysis, for example, we would say that the unconscious has to be worked on, and that it will be watered and nourished and so on, and eventually the unconscious will produce your integration. This is Jungian language, not Freudian. And you depend on that. It's not you. Because, of course, integration means that you get the two aspects of yourself together and acknowledge them both as you, the conscious and the unconscious, the power of the ego and the power of the natural organism, of the psyche. And so in every art one realizes there comes a point where your will is exhausted. You've tried everything to make something work, and it won't work. And then to achieve the perfection of the art, something has to happen of itself, which we variously call grace, inspiration, or tariki. And the problem that everybody's always wanted to know is how to make that happen. Now, you see, if we knew how to make it happen, it wouldn't be it. Because it would be something we were doing. And it would be, therefore, the old story of just simply an ego effort. And so we don't know how to make it happen. But if you just settle for that and say, well, sorry, but there's nothing you can do about it, everybody's just going to go home. And forget the whole thing and commit suicide. The thing is, therefore, the state we call faith is the key. And faith means that we know it will happen. Only we've got to wait. Only don't wait too hard, because that will be ego effort again and will stop it happening. So the thing is to learn to wait soft. That is to say, in a state of openness. Well, now, how do you do that? There are all sorts of upayas, you see, means that help one to do this. And one of them is this thing that I've been referring to as the Vajrayana. That means the diamond vehicle. The Tantrayana. That means the web vehicle. And the Mantrayana, which means the sound vehicle. Sound in the sense of incantation. I may as well begin with Mantrayana aspect of it, because this is the most perplexing to us from our point of view and doesn't make any sense. That you know there is an age-old belief in spells, and that certain formulae said in the right way will produce results. All of this descends philosophically, so far as Asia is concerned, from the Hindu Upanishadic idea that the world is the creation of sound. The Hindus say that in the beginning was Vak, which is exactly the same thing as saying in the beginning was the Word, as in the Gospel of St. John. But it doesn't mean the orders, like give him the word. The Vak means vibration. And so the name that is fundamentally Vak is the Sanskrit word Om. Because when you say Om, you begin at the back of your throat with O and you finish at your lips. And so you take in the whole range of sound. And so this word Om is called the Pranava. And it is the holiest of all names. And so you can chant Om, you know, and really stir up things. And so all but Hindus and Buddhists alike use this word Om. And will use it to set going a meditative state. This is very easy to do because it's awfully easy to concentrate on sound. It's much more difficult to keep your eyes still. You flicker because your eyes tend constantly to, it's natural for the eyes to rove over things. And you get, have difficulty in stopping your eyes from scanning. But sound is very easy to concentrate on. And the whole point of a mantra is it's a method of digging sound. Now, I hope you know what I mean by that, because I purposely used a very slangy, popular word, to dig. That means get right down into. So that you realize that the flow, the vibration of sound is a way in which you experience basic existence, being here. And you can learn everything from it, because sound is not a constant. It comes and it goes. It's on and off. You only hear it because it is vibrating. And so herein is the lesson that life is on and off, black and white, life and death, inside and outside, knowing and not knowing. They're all in the vibration. But it's easy to explain that in words. But to understand it in your bones, to feel it, you have to learn how to listen to a sound. So then they invented this way of making chanting sounds. Now there are various ways in which this is understood by people in Asia. Incidentally, I should say that this, as a form of Buddhism, what I'm calling Vajrayana, the whole movement, sprung up in about the 9th century AD, and its geographical distribution is from North India into Tibet, China and Japan and Mongolia, and it is highly characteristic of Tibetan Buddhism. So then, let's say there are various ways of understanding it. The formulas used for mantra are understood by the ignorant as being shortcuts. Instead of saying the whole sutra is summed up in the formula Om Mani Padme Hum. And you can say that, that'll do. You're a poor, weak slob, and out of infinite compassion, the Bodhisattvas have arranged to get you to Nirvana. Instead of going through all the heroic efforts of those saints and sages and meditation practices, you can just say Om Mani Padme Hum. And in fact, you don't even need to say it. You can have it printed on paper and enclosed in a silver box on the end of a stick. And all you have to do is rotate the thing. So the popular idea of this is the shortcut. The next idea of it is the one I've been sort of talking about, which is that you concentrate on these formulae, on these sounds. And there's a third interpretation, which is you might call the esoteric interpretation, which was originally, as far as I know, the first person to really bring this up was Vasubandhu, whom I told you about last week, who lived, shortly before 400. And he said the whole point of mantra is that they don't mean anything at all, and that the word Om is completely meaningless, and that all these various different kinds of incantations are totally senseless. And the idea of repeating them is to liberate yourself from the notion that the universe means anything. All those forms of Buddhism which are associated with the Vajrayana are what is called tantric. And tantric, the word basically means web structure, warp and woof. Well now, Tantra in Hindu context is a discipline that is sometimes called the fifth Veda. There are 4 Vedas, which are basic holy scriptures of Hinduism. The 5th Veda is, as it were, the esoteric one. Now, according to the 4 Vedas, in order to be liberated, you have to give up physical life. That is to say, you must not eat meat, you must not have sexual intercourse, you must not take alcohol or any kind of consciousness-changing substance. There are various other things, I forget them all. But in Tantra, the whole idea is liberation through the forbidden things. That is to say, liberation in the world, belonging to the world, participating in the world. And sometimes it is therefore called the left-hand path. Once, as a Hindu story, you know, that the Brahma was asked the question, who will gain to union with you first, he who loves you or he who hates you? And Brahma replied, he who hates me, because he will think of me more often. So, you can, in other words, attain to liberation by one of two ways. One is by complete altruism, and the other is by total selfishness. And the moral of the whole thing is that if you are completely and consistently selfish, you will discover that yourself is the other. That you don't really experience yourself at all except in terms of others. When you say, I love myself, what do you mean? You mean you love being alive. And when you push it, you see, this is the point, to push it to an extreme. So, the left-hand path is a very dangerous way of going about things, because nobody approves of it. I was discussing this morning with my father that sometime in the distant past we had witnessed a comedy wherein the stage was set of a man asleep in bed in a highly Victorian bedroom with all kinds of fancy furniture and terrible stuff, you know. And the alarm clock goes off, and he wakes up in a total rage. He immediately picks up his shoe and smashes the alarm clock. He then gets out of bed in fury. He rips the sheets to pieces, overturns the bed, finds a hammer somewhere, and starts breaking up all the crockery, the windows, and until the place is a total demolition. Finally, there is left in one corner one of those enormous standard lamps, you know, with all the sort of gewgaws on it. And he takes several runs at this, and finally he picks it up and he flings it in the air. And as it comes down, it bounces. It is made of rubber. And this is the flip, you see. And that's the surprise I was talking about in the beginning. Satori, sudden awakening. It bounced. You know, you thought you were going to crash and you bounced. And you see, this is the whole thing about Buddhism. We all think we're going to crash. And it must seem that way, because otherwise it won't be a surprise to bounce. So, if, in other words, you press your selfishness and you go into this whole question of, what do I really want? Supposing I could have it, supposing I had all the money, anything I can think of, what is it I'm after? And you explore all the sensations you can imagine, all the delights of pleasure, all the ecstasies, all the drunks, all the orgasms, all the anything you can think of. Go right through to the end of it. What is it you're looking for? You say, oh, I want to be flipped. You know, I want to be let out of myself. Well, when you're let out of yourself, that's altruism. He that would save his life shall lose it. He that loses his life, or loses his life, shall find it. You go one way or the other and it all comes to the same thing. All right, so in the same way, take the path of meditative discipline on concentration, where somebody is sitting there with a stick and says, you attend. See, I'm the master. You follow that way. See what you want to get that out of that. Try and get rid of yourself. That's one way of doing it. And there's certain kind of people who ought to take it that way. They want to. They don't know they're here unless they hurt. And that's the right way for them. We shouldn't condemn it. It's just like there are certain kinds of plants that grow this way, there are certain kinds of plants that go this way, and so there are many types. On the other hand, there's the mantra. game where people say, oh, this is so simple to do. You really don't have to chant it at all. It's just the shortest formula, and it's this kind of cut. And then they get going into this thing, and they get fascinated. Singing, Om Mani Padme Hum, so something like that. Or like those Pure Land Buddhists in Japan. Namo Amida Butts, Namo Amida Butts, Namo Amida Butts, Namo Amida Butts, Namo Amida Butts. And it eventually comes Namanda, 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 you know, and you really get with it. And when you get with it, you suddenly realize it's doing you. Now, what's the difference between you and it? Self and other. Self-power, other power. Jiriki, tariki. It's all one. Only you play it isn't. Because you have to do that. I say have to. That's not quite the right word. You do that in order to create the sensation of existence, which is called Now You See It. I want to draw your attention to the fact that very vivid Tibetan painting has a curious way of creating a state of mind, if you really start looking at it, that I can only call psychedelic. I don't know anything else quite like it. As you get into the detail of it, it's like this. Let's suppose that you look at some object, and instead of the thing becoming fuzzy and fading out, it always gets more detailed, more clear, more alive. And you suddenly find out that what you thought was just a bunch of blur was 16,000 maggots with bright eyes on them, and that every eye was a deep jewel. And you go down into these deep jewel-like eyes, and you find inside them that there are cross-legged Buddhas with aureoles round them, and necklaces of human heads. And then you start looking at those, and by Jove, in every eye on one of those human heads, you look inside it and there's another Buddha sitting there, see? And you go on like that forever and ever and ever in myriad detail, see? But now that is a state of consciousness which these artists are trying to represent. It is the idea of the Dharma Dhatu, which I explained in last seminar. That is to say, the net of jewels, where every jewel reflects all the other jewels, and therefore naturally contains the reflection of all the other jewels in each other jewel that it reflects. See? The infinite interrelatedness, or they call it mutual penetration, of everything in the universe. And so this is an art form designed to get you into the mood to understand that by looking at it. It is absolute, total fascination. But what I was trying to describe to you about the nature of these art forms, where you look at the details, and then you suddenly discover that behind the details there are millions more details. And you never fuzz out. You find, in other words, that the possibility to see down into something goes on forever and ever. Now then, that is the visual equivalent of hearing when you work with mantras, with these formal chants. To get to hear sound in such a way that Just as you could say that a visual field is rich in detail, like these paintings are, like a piece of Hindu beautiful silk weaving, which is rich with gold and flowers, and you see detail in that. Now, you can hear sound in the same way, and that's what Hindu music is playing with. And so, when you get down into that, you see, you are what I would call truly listening in to the universe. Because eventually, if you listen to sound that way, or you look at form that way, you discover its secrets. This is just another way of investigation of life, comparable to our scientific investigation with microscopes and chemical analysis and this, that, and the other. But it's a different road. Scientific investigation does what we call looking out into matter, into the physical world. This is going in the opposite direction, but it's all the same thing. It's the same continuum. But it's going into the nature of your feeling of it. That is to say, into the center of awareness, into the self. And what all these drawings are, from various points of view, is they're drawings of your own interior world. Looked at in this way, under the influence of the traditions of indeed a particular culture, which is not our culture, and which therefore strikes us as a little strange. But whenever you look at a work of art and you feel, gee, isn't that weird? It's not the way people look. For people's first impression of Chinese art, say, they perhaps don't meet Tibetans so easily, is that it's, well, everything's got curls on it. It wiggles. It's very strange. And that, the reason for that is that they are showing you a vision of the universe which you haven't looked at. And so it looks odd to you. And what you mean by odd is, well, it curls where it shouldn't. Or, I don't see things that way. I don't see them with that extra flip on them. No, indeed you don't. Because the way you see things is what you call ordinary and what you're used to. And as you know, when we see things, we ignore. We screen out certain aspects of things which we don't notice. And therefore, by studying other people's art forms, we are taught to see things that we wouldn't ordinarily notice. So that when you become used to Chinese or Tibetan painting, you say, why, of course. That's the way the world is, also. So the feeling of the strange, of the, we use the word exotic. And that means a thing looks exotic when you look at it from somebody else's point of view. And eventually you get used to it. And so if you move into a state of consciousness, such as I've been trying to describe, that is not the usual kind of state of consciousness, you say it's kind of weird, isn't it? And if you aren't prepared for that, you might be afraid of it. And say, am I going mad? Am I going out of my mind? Yes, you are. You're going out of your ordinary set of mind. But you're going into just another aspect of mind. And at first, it always feels weird. That's why people have difficulty in meditation. When they really start moving, they say, well, I'm going to go out of my mind if I think about that. You know all those famous stories about people who invented computers and went mad. Or who thought about the nature of thought and absolutely were never heard from again. There's a certain fear, in other words, of the loss of one's own ego, of the sort of regular world where conventions go on, where the familiar gestures are made so that you feel at home, and you get into other dimensions of awareness where the gestures are different. The nerves are doing something else, or even you don't know whether they're even nerves anymore. They may be Adi Buddhas and all these charming girls who you see in these things, and you don't know who they are. Some kind of weird Tibetan fantasy. You say, you get cultural shock. Stay away from that. It isn't cultural shock with respect to some other people. It's cultural shock with respect to your own inner life. In other words, that we all have in us levels of vibration which we're not used to, not familiar with, and therefore are scared of. So this particular kind of Buddhism, Vajrayana, is a rather adventurous, not to say dangerous, exploration of man's inner consciousness, depicting it in an elaborate symbolism, which, although to a Westerner used to Christian symbolism, looks as if it were a drawing of some heaven somewhere, of potentates seated on thrones and receiving homage and all that political bit. All these are quite definitely, I'm not making this up, all these are quite definitely to be understood as exteriorizations of your own being. In other words, let us suppose that we looked on a microscope slide at the cross-section of a spinal column, or of an area of the brain. This would show us certain designs, certain patterns, and they would be rather central to you. Now, these are equivalent to those, but they are moving in a different direction. And you have to understand now the difference between what is called the material body and the subtle body. The rupa, actually that means the formal body, as I explained last second seminar. The word rupa in Sanskrit, which is applied to the material world, means the world of form, the world seen in a certain form, a form to which we are accustomed. So you have a formal body, which is you as you appear to any other objective observer. Then you have a subtle body, which is the way you are as you feel to yourself. In other words, supposing you've been on a drunk and you wake up with a headache and it feels that your head is so big. Well, that's the shape of your subtle body. Spiegelberg used to show a wonderful cartoon of Corky in the comics, looking at a plane going over which was doing some stunts. And it made his neck grow longer and longer until it all got tied in knots while watching the plane. That was the shape of Corky's subtle body, which is called his linga sharira in Sanskrit, as opposed to stula sharira, which is your gross body. That means more dense. Now, so when you get the drawing of the microscope slide, say a cross-section of the spine or something that is quite fundamental to the structure of nervous system, you've got a design of the gross body. when you start looking into the other direction of things, which is how you feel, and you really go into feeling, to what sound is, to what touch is, to what emotion is, and you trace the senses back along their channels till you get to the manovijnana, which is the central sense behind each separate sense. And you find that it isn't just kind of a goo, it's an incredibly detailed experience. And then you draw pictures like this to represent what you found. We would draw them in a different way. If we genuinely made this inquiry ourselves, because we have different traditions. And we would find ourselves, goodness only knows what we'd be drawing. But we would be making things like the stained glass windows in Chartres Cathedral, you see, and crucifixes, because when you investigate sensation, you go down into it, and you feel it getting more and more intense, more and more intense, more. You see, right down as how much can you stand? Well, there's Jesus on the cross. See? Cover it with jewels. Make it gorgeous. So all these things you see are investigations of the basic sensation of being alive. And people are curious about that. You know, where are we? What's it all about? Well, the only way is to look and see. So if you want to find out what you mean by meaning, by asking a question, by being conscious, by being here, well, you have to meditate. And meditation, as not meditating on something, like thinking it out in an intellectual way, it is looking more closely at what you're asking the question about. So, you can do that externally, with a microscope, with chemical analysis, and so on. That way is valid. But it has to be balanced by the internal way, going down into your own sensations and your own consciousness. And the point that I'm going to make again in another way that I made this morning is that this isn't something you're supposed to do. That is to say, it isn't a chore. It isn't your solemn duty, unless you want to come on. That's the sort of person you ought to be. This is a delight. To get into that out of total fascination and joy and love of whatever it is that you are and everybody else is. So that this is a different spirit of religion than that to which we are normally accustomed. Instead of saying, which I suppose is an attitude characteristic of what you might call a patrist as distinct from a matrist culture. Go and read your Bible. Get down on your knees and repent, you see. Ooh. No, we feel pretty spooked by that attitude. This one says instead, psst, I've got something to show you. Look in here. You want to know what all this is about? You watch. Take a look. You look in there and you say, oh no. It can't really be like that. You look at this other guy who's the guru, you see. He says, it's all right, don't be afraid. Ooh, that's not possible. Yeah, you know. And this is the attitude. And I don't know how to suggest it except by this sort of drama of the two different approaches. So, this then is the, as near as I can get to describing it, the inner meaning of Tantra, of an attitude which is common to both Hinduism and Buddhism. They say Tantra. It means not only the web, the warp and the woof, where you can't have yes without no. You can't have this direction without having that direction, because this direction, to have it there, needs this other one to hang on to. But he says, no, look here, I got to have something to hang on to too, so we hang on to each other, and so there we are. See? That's the nature of a web. And so, Tantra means the comprehension of the unity of opposites, of the good and the bad, of life and death, of love and hate, of all extremes in the whole spectrum of our emotions, our sensations, everything. In a sense, this is not something for children, because you have to be reliable to get into this, because otherwise you go berserk. You wouldn't pay any respect to any rules or anything if you didn't have a mature attitude before getting mixed up in this, because you suddenly see anything and everything goes. There is no way of being wrong, because you are it, whatever there is, forever and ever and ever, and that's so. You can die, fantastic, forget everything altogether, blow right out, come back, because the light is the other side of the darkness. Be all new again, but it's all you just as it was before, because you do the same patterns, same kind of stars, same kind of physical properties, the same dance. Blot it out, it starts again. Just like the physical forces and things, you see, repeat their fundamental laws and patterns. It's exactly the same with the inner world I'm talking about. Investigating the outer world, investigating the inner world, it's all one. And that's you. So, Buddhist enlightenment is simply to know that secret. And that's what it means, really, finally, to grow up. You see, again, just as I said that we find in our own preachers and religious people an attitude of against lifeness, and we get a funny feeling about that they're full of reprimands, and they're full of, there's a trap, you see, and they have the Young People's Fellowship, as I explained, to suck you into this trap. It's exactly the same thing exists here. In particular, I think one of the basic tantric texts is called Saraha, the Treasury of Songs, by Professor Gunter of the University of Saskatchewan. Saraha was a tantric teacher living probably in the area of Bengal about 1000 AD. He is making a critique of both the Hindu and Buddhist orthodoxy. So he says the Brahmins who do not know the truth recite the 4 Vedas in vain. With earth and water and kusha grass they make preparations, and seated at home they kindle fire. And from the senseless offerings that they make, they burn their eyes with the pungent smoke. In lordly garb, with 1 staff or 3, they think themselves wise with their Brahmanical law. Vainly is the world enslaved by their vanity. They do not know that the Dharma is the same as the non-Dharma. With ashes these masters smear their bodies, and on their heads they wear matted hair. Seated within the house they kindle lamps, seated in a corner they tinkle bells. They adopt a posture and fix their eyes, whispering in ears and deceiving folk, teaching widows and bald-headed nuns and such like, initiating them as they take their fee. The Jain monks mock the way with their appearance, with their long nails and their filthy clothes, or else naked and with disheveled hair, enslaving themselves with their doctrine of liberation. If by nakedness one is released, then dogs and jackals must be so. If from absence of hair there comes perfection, then the hips of maidens must be so. If from having a tail there comes release, then for the peacock and yak it must be so. If wisdom consists in eating just what one finds, then for elephant and horse it must be so. For these Jain monks there is no release, Saraha says. Deprived of the truth of happiness, they do but afflict their own bodies. Then there are the novices and bhikshu, that means a Buddhist monk, with the teaching of the old school. That's not the same as old school Thai. It means the old school of Theravada Buddhism. With the teaching of the old school who renounced the world to be monks, some are seen sitting and reading the scriptures. Some wither away in their concentration on thought. Others have recourse to the Mahayana. This is the doctrine which expounds the original text, they say. Others just meditate on mandala circles. Others strive to define the 4th stage of bliss. With such investigating, they fall from the way. Some would envisage it as space. Others endow it with the nature of voidness, and thus they are generally in disagreement. Whoever deprived of the innate, that's what you really are, seeks nirvana, can in no wise acquire the absolute truth. Whoever is intent on anything else, how may he gain release? Will one gain release abiding in meditation? What's the use of lamps? What's the use of offerings? What's to be done by reliance on mantras? What's the use of austerities? What's the use of going on pilgrimage? Is release achieved by bathing in water? Abandon such false attachments and renounce such illusions. People you've just been listening to, chanting the sutras on Koyasan, which is the sort of ultimate center, retreat, inner sanctuary of Japanese practice of Vajrayana, Mahayana Buddhism, are a bunch of boys who are just like American college boys who play football, and they haven't the faintest idea what they're doing. Not today. They're doing this because their fathers have sent them there. Their fathers own temples, and they've got to carry on their father's tradition, because after all the family business has to go on. And they have no more idea what this is all about than the man in the moon. And you and I can sit here and we could get swinging with this music, we could dance to it, and we could go very far out on it, which was what you were originally supposed to do. And for them it's a chore. It's a thing you have to get up for at 5 o'clock in the morning. And you have to memorize all this, and you have to get it exactly right and do it. And they've completely forgotten what it was all about. But it was originally there. It's a funny thing how this happens, you see. But you see how I was explaining to you this morning? How we have a rhythm between remembering and not remembering. You remember long enough to know that you're there. Because if you don't remember, nothing makes any impression upon you. Therefore you're not there. But then when memory gets too much, and you're too much there, then you have to realize that all memory is an illusion, that there is nothing except the present moment. And that there is no future, as equally no past. And then you're liberated. But when you get liberated, you have to come back in and play memory again. There's a cleaning process. In other words, you wipe off the blackboard, and then you start writing again. And then you wipe it off, and then you start writing again. And this is the process whereby life is kept going. So in the same way with these people, they have come to a point in the historical development of their way of life where they remember too much. It's not new to them. And all this therefore becomes what we call going through the motions. And that's all they're doing. And while they're singing all this kind of thing, they're thinking about, for God's sake, I wish we'd get out and smoke a cigarette, and how can I get down into town tonight somehow and make that girl? See, their minds are absolutely off it. And so it comes to us as a new thing that we've never heard before. And we could sit around and really dig that. And, we could sit around on the floor and turn head over heels and jump up and down in rhythm with this music and really go out of our minds with it. And they've lost it. But you see, this is the way in which different cultures fertilize each other. When one culture loses its grip on what it has, it can toss what it did have to another culture which will take up the rhythm. And that's why everybody in the West, you see, is getting fascinated with Oriental culture and building themselves Japanese houses and so on. When you go to Kyoto, you go into a hotel, restaurant, so on, all the Japanese are eating Western food. All the Americans are eating Japanese food. And the funniest tricks I've had of playing this with the Japanese, that the thing that really blows them up is if a Westerner wears their clothes. This they just can't possibly understand. They wear our clothes, and they even blue jeans and all that kind of thing. And here they are all dressed up like Westerners, especially in the business suit thing, which is the acme of success and respectability and really being up with the world. And then some American comes around wearing a kimono, and they giggle. Now, giggling in Japan is not laughter. It's a sign of embarrassment. How could you? What's going on here? I don't understand. And because they've lost the rhythm of this thing, and they have to go into our rhythm. Now, we, in the meantime, will get into their rhythm and delight in tatamis on the floor, kimonos, tea ceremony, the Buddhist religion, chants, gongs, and so on. And we'll get an entirely new thing out of that, just like they got it from China in the first place. And the Chinese got it from India. And then the historical traces of the thing are lost. We don't know where they got it from. But do you see, there is no such thing as a pure culture. A lot of people have a kind of compulsion about the propriety of being culturally pure. And they say, well, now look here, after all, you're an American, and you shouldn't go around wearing Chinese or Japanese clothes. You should be where you are and what you are. Except that this was imported from Germany or England or somewhere else altogether. What we call being American. There is no such thing. Nobody has anything that is absolutely original and genuine. It's all borrowed. All originality is borrowed. Think that one through. Really think it through. Everybody is in debt to someone or something else. Who helped you on in life? You know, you had a parent, you had a father and mother, and they put themselves out so that your life is in a way borrowed and you're in debt. And if you really think through how you got into business and made your living, somehow you're in debt. And yet, on the other hand, you have to claim that you're responsible, you put energy into it, you started it. And so this is the same paradox that I was talking about this morning, that the echo, which is memory, is simultaneously what tells you you exist and what traps you. So in the sense that it tells you you exist, it's an advantage. To the extent that it traps you, it's a debt. You're in debt. You should be thankful. Somebody gave it to you. Ultimately, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Lord God did it all for you. And you should be thankful. And say, anything bad that I did was from me. Dear God, anything good that I did was from you. See? What a marvelous mix-up that is. But all I'm saying is this. There is a point in all this development where you have to say to people, please come off it. In other words, these boys here in Koyasan, I was aching to know enough Japanese to say to them, do you realize what a great thing you have here? Couldn't you possibly enjoy it for a few minutes? And let's get together and all join hands around here and go through this again, these sutras, and really make it. But instead of that, they're going boom, 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 boom. And they think it's, I don't know what they think it's all about. It's just the same way. I suppose I could play you a recording of British choristers singing at King's College Chapel in Cambridge. Beautiful, you know, the most gorgeous voices. They're little boys. And they're doing it because they know that's what they have to do. It takes you much older to realize what the great stuff this is. You have to be very much older to see that hymns about what miserable sinners we are really quite great. So I'm talking, you see, about the same process of what has been called flip-flopability, whereby we switch from one attitude to another, one situation to another, and this pulse switch situation is the very nature of existence. That's why your heart does that. That's why all sounds, all light, everything is going bloop, 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 bloop. See? And so because of that bloop, you know you're here. Well now, to round off this whole seminar, on Mahayana Buddhism, I have to bring up one further subject altogether. We've discussed, you see, we started out at the very beginning with solid emptiness, which was the Madhyamika doctrine of complete letting go of all opinions, of every kind of psychological and intellectual and spiritual security, because there's nothing you can grasp. We next went on to the Vijñapti Matra school, which is that everything is in your mind. And I showed you the difference between that and Western subjective idealism. That mind means something different in the Orient than it does in the West, because matter means something different. Matter in the Orient means form, shape, outline, structure, rupa in Sanskrit. And so mind means not the opposite of matter, exactly, but in a way, what we would call the most material thing there is. And so the diamond is used as the image of the mind, because the diamond is harder than all other materials and can cut everything else, and is completely transparent. So this is their image of the mind, whereas our image of the mind tends to be the opposite of the material, to be, instead of hard, something that you can wave through like air. Their image of the mind is the diamond. And then we've gone on from that point to see the Avatangsaka philosophy of the complete interdependence of all things in the universe. That is to say, that from any grain of dust you can reconstruct the whole universe. Because any given grain of dust, every discarded nose picking, every hair on a mosquito's wing, anything you can think of, exists only in context with everything else. So that you could, if you knew enough, reconstruct the whole universe from this discarded nose picking or whatever it was. See? That's called Jiji Muge, the complete interdependence of everything. Then we have been working now with the idea of Tantra, of the web, of the inner meaning of sexuality, and therefore of attachment or detachment. How those people who say, well, you shouldn't get involved with the girls, as being attached and it's not spiritual. And those people who say, on the other hand, you should get completely attached. I've been trying to show how this game has its own inner meaning. So finally, we've got to come round to one form of Mahayana that I haven't really discussed at all, to complete the whole scene, which is what is called the School of the Pure Land. And this is the most popular form of Mahayana Buddhism in the Far East. In China, in Japan, everywhere. The multitudes go for this kind. And it's all under the presiding image of one of those Jnani Buddhas called Amitabha, whose name means boundless light, and who is a sort of subdivision or aspect of Mahavairocana, who is the great Sun Buddha, and is therefore probably derived historically from Ahura Mazda, from Persia, the great sun god of the Mazdaeans and the Parsis. But although that may have been what set it all off, it has been greatly transformed by being canalized through Buddhism. Now, you have all seen photographs of the Buddha at Kamakura, the Daibuts. That enormous bronze figure that sits in a beautiful park with pine trees, the temple having long been demolished by a tidal wave, for which thanks be to God. Because if it hadn't been for the tidal wave, nobody would ever have really seen this figure. But there is at Kamakura this huge bronze figure. It's about 42 feet high. And here this creature sits, surrounded by a great busyness. Thousands of school children are all the time on tours, streaming by, photographers, people selling this, that, and the other, souvenirs, exhibitions of dwarf trees and everything. They're all going on around. And here this thing sits and looks down forever. And nothing can hush it. I mean, let's put it this way. It hushes everything. That no matter how much turmoil of children, etc., is going on in this park, this huge face presides over everything. And you cannot ignore it. It subdues you into peace. Without doing it in an authoritative way. It doesn't say to you, shut up. It just is so peaceful that you cannot help catching the infection of peace that comes from this figure. And this is the figure of Amitabha. Not the historical Shakyamuni Gautama Buddha living in India, but one of the Jnani Buddhas who is not manifested in the world. Now, the religion connected with this figure is called Pure Land, Jodo in Japanese, Shinshu, the true sect of the Pure Land. It comes again, the origins are always in India. But the Japanese, under the genius of Honen and Shinran, who were medieval Buddhist saints, developed their own special variety of it. And this is a very strange religion. Because it takes its basis as follows. We are living now in the most decadent period of history. That's what they say. And this comes back from the Hindu idea that this is the Kali Yuga. This is the end of time, where everything is completely fouled up. And this started in about 3000 BC. February the 23rd, 3023 BC, the Kali Yuga began. And it's got to last yet for 5,000 years. And then everything will fall apart. The universe will disappear out of sheer failure. So that now, nobody can be virtuous. Because everybody who tries to be virtuous in this epoch of the world is merely showing off. It's not really pure. It's just pretending you're virtuous. It's a big act. In other words, so you give money to charity, not because you really love the people you're giving money to, but because you are under a sense of guilt and you feel you ought to. And therefore, because of that inescapable bad motivation, nobody can possibly liberate themselves from the chains of karma. The more you try to get out of your karma, that is to say your conditioning, your bondage to your past, the more you simply get yourself involved in it. And therefore all human beings living in the end time of the Kali Yuga, or what the Japanese call Mappo, are just hopeless, hopelessly selfish. So in this predicament, you cannot rely on jiriki, that means your own power, to get out, to get liberated from self. You have to rely on tariki, which is the power of something else altogether than you, something quite different. So in the Jodo Shinshu sect, the tariki, the other power, is represented in the form of Amitabha, or Japanese say Amida, this great beneficent Buddha figure who everybody loves. And he's so strangely different from any kind of authoritarian God figure that we have in the West. Amida doesn't bombinate. He sits there serenely, quiet. He doesn't preach. And all you have to do is to say his name in the formula Namu Amida Butsu, which means Namu, name, Amida Butsu, of Amida Buddha. Namu Amida Butsu. And all you have to do is to say that formula, and after death you will be reborn in a special paradise called Sukhavati, which is Jodo, the Pure Land, where becoming enlightened is a cinch. It has none of the difficulties surrounding it that we have in our ordinary life today. Everybody born in the Pure Land is born in the inside of a lotus. There's a huge lotus pond in front of where Amida sits with all his attendants. And the lotuses come up and they go pop, as the bud breaks. And every time it goes pop like this, there's a new little being in there who is somebody who said the formula Namu Amida Butsu. And those are human beings who are now sitting on lotuses like Buddhas. And you should see, you go to Koyasan, and they have a great painting there in their museum of what it's like to arrive there. They have a huge panorama of Amitabha and all his attendants, and especially the Apsaras. The Apsaras are the heavenly girls, which you would call, in Islamic religion, the Huri, from which we get the word whore. But the Apsaras are very beautiful girls playing lutes. And they have one of them that is put on the front page of the guide to the museum because she's so beautiful. Matter of fact, the admission ticket is a colored reproduction of this Apsara to the Koyasan Museum. And and she is a girl playing a lute, a biwa, kind of a mandolin-shaped instrument. And she looks at you with lovely, longing eyes. And so, this is welcome to Amida's paradise, where you will all sit on lotuses and be Buddhas without any difficulty. But the point is, all you have to do to get there is to say Namu Amida Butsu. You don't even have to believe that it works.
Now that is the religion of most Japanese Buddhists, believe it or not. In other words, if you really get this and feel that that's really going to happen to you, you'll be grateful, and you'll try to help other people and be a bodhisattva and so on, and be generally helpful around the scene. But the whole idea is that you cannot do it by your own effort. And if the moment you think you can do it by your own effort, you're a phony. You have instead to go completely with the other to disown your own power and capability of being virtuous, unselfish, etc. So then, this kind of religion develops a peculiar kind of saint. And they call these people Myo Konin. Myo means wonderful, Ko means fine, Nin means man or person. There can be a woman, Myo Konin. It's not sexually restricted to men. So a Myo Konin is a very special kind of character. There are stories told about Myo Konin. There is one, for example, a traveling man who comes to a temple during the course of the night and walks in, and he takes the sacred cushions on which the priests sit and arranges them right in front of the altar and goes to sleep. In the morning, the priest comes in and says, "What's going on here?" And the Myo Konin looks at him and says, "Oh, you must be a stranger. You don't belong to the family." A Myo Konin, like Ryokan, who was a great, marvelous, kind of foolish man, rather like the Franciscan spirit, rather like the spirit of the Russian mystics. Ryokan one day came into a house where there was a kakemono, hanging scroll of a tiger. And he was a very simple man, very direct person. And he looked at the tiger, and he was sitting there. He thought he was alone in the room. He looked at the tiger and he said, "Ah!" Then suddenly he noticed that there was a servant girl sitting quietly waiting for the host to come in. And he said to her, "Shh, don't you tell anybody about this. They'll think I'm crazy." Another time, he had great ability for calligraphy, doing beautiful writing. And people were always trying to get his calligraphy from him. And he was cagey about it. It wasn't so easy to get it. So one day, a very, very great man invited him for dinner and again left him alone in a reception room where there was stretched out on the floor some absolutely gorgeous paper with ink and brushes just waiting there. And he got so fascinated that he just couldn't resist. Like a child. He simply couldn't resist doing his calligraphy on that piece of paper. And suddenly, as he realized he had done it, that he had spoiled this gorgeous paper, which was incredibly expensive, the host walked in and he apologized. He said, "Really, I don't know what to do. I'm so sorry I couldn't resist the temptation to make some things on this beautiful paper." And the host said, "Oh, please don't worry about that." Because he had now possessed himself of a priceless object of art. This man's work today sells for thousands and thousands of dollars.
So this is the spirit. I'm telling these anecdotes to try and illustrate the spirit of what's called a myokonin. Somebody in the swing of realizing that all the very great thing in life is not your own doing. That it comes from the side of things, the flip, in other words, of experience that you call other. There are some people who believe it comes from the split in experience you call yourself. That's the Jiriki people. The Tariki people believe it comes from the other. But now what happens is this. When you penetrate deeply into the doctrines of the Pure Land school, the simple people believe that there really is Amitabha Buddha sitting on his golden lotus surrounded by all those apsaras. Exactly from Japan, 108,000 miles to the west, there is a paradise where all those people sit and where you will be reborn when you die. And the simple priests of the sect in the country villages today still insist that that's what you should believe. But the sophisticated priests don't believe that at all. They know that Amitabha is in you. Only it is that side of you which you don't define as you. When you say, I have a body, instead of saying I am a body, that's because you feel that your body happens to you. That it's something you got mixed up with, that was given to you by your parents. You don't say, I beat my heart on purpose. You feel that your heart is something that happens to you. So all that side of things that you experience as a passive recipient of it is tariki, other power. And so they're making the point that that is what liberates you. And the meaning of this is, when you say that it is the tariki side of things, everything you define as involuntary, that happens to you passively, if you say that's what liberates you, the meaning of that is that that side of experience is also you. In other words, the sky is blue, but you are bluing it. And you're doing it with your nervous system, which has a certain structure, as a result of which the light coming through air looks blue, because it does so in terms of your nervous system. But you are bluing that sky. Only you are interpreting that activity as something which you don't do, but that just happens to you. So a person who gets completely hung up on the idea that he doesn't blue the sky, that there are certain things he does on the one hand, and they are a rather small, restricted group of events. But on the other hand, there's a huge set of circumstances which happens to you. And you disown that and say, I'm not responsible for it. Therefore, as a result of saying you're not responsible for that, you become its victim. And you start objecting to it, and you play the game that this was all put on me. So this way of Buddhism is to teach you that what is put on you saves you. And if you will just get with that and accept automatic liberation, which you don't deserve because you didn't work for it, in just the same way as you have said by your own argument that you didn't build Mount Tamalpais. There it is over there, a huge erection of rock. And you say, well, I didn't put that there. It's beautiful. I love to see it and climb on it. But I didn't put it there.
Okay. And what did you do? You didn't make your skeleton. You may have thought out some clever things and done some things that were constructive in human life, and you got paid for. But how did you manufacture the consciousness which you needed to do that with? How did you train your fingers? You know, you can with these dexterous thumb-finger meeting instruments do all kinds of skillful things. But how did you arrive with a hand like that? And you say, well, I don't know, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. God gave me these fingers. And I have accepted them from God as talents, as gifts, and I'm supposed to do the best with it I can. But in all this, who are you? Who is the recipient of these gifts? Well, of course, nobody would ever think there was a gift unless there was a recipient. Just as nobody knows there's a sound unless there's an echo. Just as nobody knows there's I'm here unless you're here. It's all the same duality. And all these dualities are basically a non-duality. That is to say, they are one process under the surface, diversified. So then, in this kind of Buddhism, which is called Tariki, the Buddhism of faith, we come to exactly the same conclusion that the Jiriki people come to. In Zen, which is Jiriki, you work it out by yourself, damn you. You know, you grit your teeth and you meditate on this koan and you knock yourself out day after day after day after day, because the Master has challenged you to be spontaneous, to be genuine, to be completely sincere, to give him, to be, you know, to throw yourself away. And look at all this Zen training, with its meditation and its long hours sitting in the cold dawn, is saying to you, come on now, get rid of yourself. Throw yourself away. Stop caring whether you live or die. You see? Then you'll be liberated. You'll just love it when you're not in your own way anymore. Just imagine if you didn't worry. Ever. You're saying you worry just so long as you hold on to yourself. Now throw it away. We're going to put you through a discipline. Boom, 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 every morning. And we're going to harden you. We're going to make you so that you see, you join this order, you don't own anything, that we just put a robe on you, and you'll be begging, you'll be eating nothing in particular. It's a terrible diet. And you'll be nobody. Dig that, because then you'll be free. And they call a Zen monk an unsui, which means cloud water, because he drifts like a cloud and flows like water. Now make that, you see? And so they, with their jiriki, all try to make that thing. But then they discover that they want it so badly. They want to be unsui. They want to be detached so badly that they are really just as selfish as anybody else. And so then they come to a paradox, that so long as I'm trying to get it, I can't make it. Well, so then from the other point of view, the Tariki people are saying, well, you can't make it. And you have to rely on the other, or what Christians call grace, to realize it. Well, that is simply a complicated, well, maybe not so complicated. It's a way of saying to people who think in symbols. Don't you see that self and other go together? That you don't need to cling to yourself, because you have everything you called other, and that's you too. That if you, but you only realize this if you explore it. If you go to an extreme. So you can go to the extreme by pursuing the idea of total courage, of letting go of everything, of being a true Zen monk and abandoning all your property and living in a barn and sitting in the middle of the night in the cold and eating rice and pickles and so on. And you can explore liberation that way. That's going to an extreme. But eventually you'll come round to the same point as the person who goes to the other extreme, which is no effort whatsoever. It comes of itself. Only. He gets in a kind of bind too. Because when am I making no effort? Even if I say Namu Amida Butsu, I'm doing something about it. Now, I've got to stop saying this Namu Amida Butsu. You know, saying Namu Amida Butsu is so easy. But it's still a little bit work. And I mustn't do any work at all. How can you get to the point where you don't do any work at all? But you just mustn't do anything. And you find yourself that is as difficult as the other situation was. You see, to do nothing, really do nothing, with perfection, is as difficult as to do everything.